Imagine a world where the gods were not distant myths written in holy books, but living rulers whose power was woven into every field, every marketplace, every worker's daily life. A world where temples rose like mountains above the cities, not as places of prayer alone, but as the beating heart of an economy so vast, so organized, and so divine that it shaped the destiny of humanity for thousands of years. This was Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where the gods did not simply demand worship. They demanded management, production, wealth, and obedience. Long before the Roman Empire minted its first coin, long before Egyptian pharaohs carved their names into stone, the Mesopotamian gods had already built one of the earliest economic empires on Earth. And today, we're going to uncover how these ancient deities became the first landlords, the first employers, the first bankers, and how their temples operated like giant corporations, controlling everything from agriculture to international trade routes. So, settle in, because the truth behind this divine empire is stranger, deeper, and far more revolutionary than anything you've heard before. To understand the economic world of the Mesopotamian gods, we have to step back nearly 6,000 years into the cradle of civilization, into cities like Uruk, Ur, Babylon, and Lagash. These were not simple settlements. They were engineered power centers built around a single concept, that everything on Earth belonged to the gods and humans existed to serve them. This belief wasn't just religious, it was economic. The temple wasn't only a holy sanctuary, it was a vast administrative machine. It owned the fields where barley grew, the orchards that produced dates, the herds of sheep and cattle, with the workshops where craftsmen shaped clay and copper. Behind the towering ziggurats were entire armies of scribes who tracked every grain harvested, every laborer employed, every transaction made. Society was structured like a divine corporation. The god was the owner, the high priest was the CEO, the king was the appointed manager, and the people who were the workforce that kept the entire cosmic order running. In this video, we'll explore how this extraordinary system worked, how it shaped the world's first cities, and how its legacy still influences modern economies in ways we rarely notice. This is the story of the economic empire of the Mesopotamian gods, a world where heaven and earth were bound together not by faith alone, but by contracts, resources, and the oldest bureaucracy in history. Long before the world knew the names of Caesar, Alexander, or Pharaoh, there existed a civilization where power did not belong to kings or armies, but to beings believed to shape the universe itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, the gods were not distant figures living in the sky. They were real economic forces with land, wealth, and entire populations assigned to their service. Picture massive temple complexes towering above cities, not as places only for worship, but as headquarters of divine corporations that controlled farming, trade, production, and even law. Imagine a society where every harvest, every trade caravan, every field of barley, every shipment of timber was recorded not for the king, but for the gods. These gods-owned estates, larger than modern countries, commanded thousands of workers, and shaped the world's first financial system. This is the story of the economic empire of the Mesopotamian Gaza system, so advanced, so organized, and so deeply rooted in belief that it became the engine of one of humanity's earliest civilizations. And as we uncover this world, you'll see that the foundations of today's economy, contracts, wages, taxes, banks, all began under the shadow of ancient temples dedicated to divine masters. To understand the power of Mesopotamia's economic system, we must step into a world where religion and economy were not separate forces, they were one and the same. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Babylon, and Lagash did not grow by accident. They were built around massive temples that served as the home of the gods on Earth. These temples were more than sacred spaces. They were the planning rooms of the first organized economy in human history. The Mesopotamians believed that humans were created by the gods for one purpose: to work. Agriculture, building, shepherding, crafting, and trading were all seen as sacred duties performed on behalf of divine owners. This belief system created a unique economic model, one where the gods were the ultimate landlords, and priests acted as administrators managing the resources of heaven. The temple staff included accountants, merchants, craftsmen, and laborers. They kept detailed records using the world's first writing system, which was invented not to tell stories, but to track goods and workers. This video will pull back the curtain on how this divine economic machine operated, how it built the world's first cities, and how its influence still echoes in our modern financial systems today. In Mesopotamia, the foundation of the entire economic structure was a belief that everything, land, water, animals, and people, belonged to the gods. This divine ownership was not symbolic. It was a literal, functioning system of property management. Each city was dedicated to a specific deity, and all the resources within that territory were seen as part of the god's estate. Humans, therefore, were created as laborers to maintain and expand this divine property. Temples acted as the central administrative hubs where priests managed the gods' real-world assets, They assigned fields to workers, organized irrigation, distributed rations, and collected taxes in the name of the gods. Because the gods were eternal, their wealth grew endlessly, giving temples enormous economic power. For the Mesopotamians, fulfilling one's duties on the goddess' estate was not only work but an act of devotion. Even kings acknowledged that their authority came from serving the gods' interests. This system created a stable social order where religion justified labor and labor maintained religion. Through this powerful ideological framework, the gods became the earliest economic rulers, shaping society into a divine hierarchy that controlled every aspect of life. Mesopotamian temples were not quiet, spiritual places. They were busy economic centers buzzing with activity. Around the towering ziggurats were vast complexes that included warehouses, workshops, kitchens, granaries, and administrative offices. The temple owned enormous agricultural lands worked by thousands of farmers. They produced barley, dates, vegetables, and livestock for sacrifice, consumption, and trade. The temple also operated fisheries, manufactured textiles, brewed beer, and managed brick-making for construction projects. Priests oversaw the allocation of resources, while scribes documented every activity on clay tablets. Women played a major role in temple-run textile factories, weaving cloth that was traded across the region. Temples also cared for orphans, the elderly, and the poor, functioning much like social welfare institutions. Because temples received offerings, taxes, and tributes, they accumulated huge surpluses, allowing them to finance large-scale projects such as canal construction and public festivals. The Inanna Temple of Inanna in Uruk, for example, owned herds of thousands of sheep and controlled vast farmland. In this way, temples became the richest and most influential institutions in Mesopotamian society, powerful enough to rival kings and shape the direction of entire cities. The economic world of the gods needed organization, and this led to one of the greatest inventions in human history: writing. Cuneiform began as a system for accounting, tracking grain, sheep, taxes, and labor. Scribes were trained professionals, respected for their ability to record every detail accurately. They created lists, receipts, contracts, and inventories. The temple archives contained thousands of tablets documenting the movement of goods. Workers were paid rations of barley, oil, and beer, and each distribution was meticulously recorded. The temple's bureaucracy functioned like a corporation with departments, managers, and standardized procedures. Every step of production, planting, harvesting, storing, weaving, trading was monitored and logged. This bureaucratic efficiency allowed temples to manage massive estates without losing control. Even legal matters, such as disputes over land or contracts, were handled through these records. The scribes created the first long-term archives in human history, preserving data for decades. This administrative genius set the foundation for later governments, kingdoms, and empires. Through writing, the temple economy became stable, scalable, and nearly immortal. Without this bureaucratic system, the gods' economic empire could never have survived for thousands of years. The gods' economic influence extended far beyond Mesopotamia's borders. Temples organized long-distance trade expeditions to secure valuable resources that could not be produced locally. Merchants, acting as agents of the gods, traveled across deserts, mountains, and seas to bring back goods such as cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Oman, tin from Anatolia, gold from Egypt, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. These materials were essential for tools, jewelry, weapons, and religious objects. Trade caravans were blessed by priests before departure, and merchants were sometimes protected by the temple's political alliances. Temples also acted as early banks, providing loans to merchants and charging interest recorded in cuneiform. Through trade, Mesopotamian cities became wealth and cultural crossroads where ideas, technologies, and products exchanged hands. Ports and river harbors were bustling with boats carrying grain, wool, beer, and crafted goods. The gods were seen as guardians of these trade networks, ensuring safe travels and prosperous returns. This ability to connect with distant lands helped Mesopotamia rise as the world's first major economic center, influencing societies thousands of miles away. Although temples held immense economic power, kings played a crucial role in managing the divine economy. Mesopotamian kings were more than rulers; they were representatives of the gods on earth, entrusted with maintaining order and protecting the gods' property. Kings controlled armies, defended cities, and supervised large construction projects like temples, canals, and city walls. They collected taxes, distributed land, and enforced laws that regulated wages, interest rates, and contracts. Hammurabi's famous code includes many laws related to trade, agriculture, and labor, demonstrating how deeply the economy was tied to legal authority. While temples provided spiritual and economic power, kings provided political and military strength. Together they formed a dual system of governance. The temple managed wealth and production, while the king maintained stability and expansion. Sometimes, kings even competed with temples for influence. but both understood that the economy was essential to their survival. By acting as administrators of the gods' earthly affairs, kings ensured that the divine economy remained strong and sustainable. At the heart of the temple economy were the thousands of workers who kept the system functioning. Most laborers were farmers who cultivated barley, wheat, and dates. Shepherds managed large herds of sheep and goats used for wool and sacrifice. Skilled craftsmen, porters, metalworkers, carpenters, and weavers created goods for trade and temple use. Women formed the backbone of the textile industry, working in temple-run workshops that produced cloth exported across the Near East. Workers received rations of food, oil, and beer instead of money, creating a controlled but stable economic system. Slaves were also part of the workforce, often prisoners of war or people who fell into debt. They performed heavy labor in fields and construction. However, slaves could sometimes buy their freedom, and their treatment varied across regions. Specialists like astronomers, priests, and scribes held higher positions and enjoyed better living conditions. The temple's structured labor system created predictable production cycles, ensuring food security and economic stability. This workforce made it possible for Mesopotamia to sustain large populations and develop urban life long before many other civilizations. Over time, the temple economy faced challenges that weakened its dominance. Environmental changes, shifting river paths, and salinization of farmland reduced agricultural productivity. Foreign invasions disrupted trade routes, and political instability weakened temple authority. As private merchants became more influential, economic power slowly shifted away from the gods and toward individuals and royal institutions. By the time of the Neo-Babylonian and Assyrian empires, many temples were still powerful, but they no longer controlled every aspect of the economy. Despite this decline, the legacy of the temple economy endured. Mesopotamia gave the world its earliest forms of banking, interest rates, commercial contracts, standardized weights, and legal protections for economic activity. These innovations influenced later civilizations, including the Greeks, Persians, and Romans. Even today, our systems of taxation, record-keeping, wages, and corporate management echo the structures first created in Mesopotamian temples. The economic empire of the gods may have faded, but its impact remains engraved in the foundations of modern society. As we step back from the ancient cities of Uruk, Ur, and Babylon, one truth becomes clear. The Mesopotamians did far more than build temples. They built the foundations of the world we live in today. Their gods may no longer rule the fields or command the scribes, but the systems they pioneered continue to pulse through modern civilization. The contracts we sign, the taxes we pay, the wages we earn, the banks we use, and the bureaucracies that shape our governance all echo the structures first created in those temple complexes thousands of years ago. What began as a sacred duty to serve the gods became humanity's earliest attempt to organize society on a massive scale, linking faith, labor, and economics in a way the world had never seen before. The economic empire of the Mesopotamian gods was not just an ancient curiosity, it was a prototype for the future, a blueprint that would guide countless empires and influence the evolution of civilization itself. As we close this journey, we're reminded that the past is never truly gone. It lives quietly beneath every system we rely on, every institution we trust, and every structure that keeps our modern world turning.